Φίλες και φίλοι, γεια σας. Έχουμε εδώ στο στούντιο του ΚΙΠΕ την επικεφαλής του κλιμακίου του Διεθνούς Νομισματικού Ταμείου για την Κύπρο, την κυρία Ανίτα Τουλαντάρ, με την οποία θα συζητήσουμε για την κυπριακή οικονομία στον απόϊχο της ολοκλήρωσης του ελέγχου που διενήργησε το Ταμείο για την κυπριακή οικονομία για το 2019. Mrs. Tuladhar, welcome. Let me start with a more general question. How would you describe the performance of the secret economy and what are the challenges and vulnerabilities going forward?
Let me begin by thanking you for hosting us today. In terms of the state of the economy, I would say the Cypriot economy is relatively robust. We are projecting growth to be around 3% this year and next. Of course, it is moderating from the very high levels of growth that we saw in the past few years, and this is because of the external developments. But the domestic sector has been relatively strong, especially in the construction and the services sector. Now, of course, there are risks in the horizon. We see that the global trade tensions, as well as the slowdown in the euro area, pose risks for the economy. Of course, the prospect of a hard Brexit also creates risks to the economy. These are from the external side. On the domestic side, I think if there are slowdown in the resolution of NPLs, that can also create a risk for financial stability in the future. So these are the main risks and the outlook that we see. In terms of the policy challenges, I would perhaps highlight three key areas. First, as I mentioned, is the need to strengthen the banking sector. We have seen that the NPLs have come down from almost half of loans to about a third. So there's a significant drop, but it is still a very high level of NPLs. So there is a need to work out these NPLs. In this context, what we've seen in the recent months in terms of potential reversal or backsliding of reforms in the foreclosure framework risks losing some of the gains that we have seen and creates a risk for stability, as I just mentioned. The second area I would highlight is the level of indebtedness, private indebtedness. We know that the NPLs have moved away from banking sector to these have been moved outside of the banking sector, but they still remain in the economy, and the level of resolution of this debt has been relatively slow. So it is very important that these debt are also resolved so that this can facilitate new financing of new investment and increase the strength for medium-term growth. So the third area I would highlight is that the sustainability of growth. I think Cyprus has been lagging in terms of productivity growth, and there is a need to improve the efficiency of the economy. What do I mean? Improve the administrative efficiency, increase more investments in technological adoption, increase the investments in building up human capital with the right type of skills. Similarly, in the fiscal sector, of course, there has been, it has performed very well. There has been large surpluses, but in terms of this type of spending, there is a need to improve the efficiency there as well, so that there is increased spending on more productive sectors.
And this, let's continue from there on. This, you mean productive spending, it goes as opposed to non-productive, I mean unelastic expenditure like the wage bill, which has been going up following the normalization of the economy.
Well, what we see is that the level of public wages is relatively high if you compare with more other advanced economies. So what we are concerned is that if this keeps increasing, then it will crowd out more spending in areas, for example, in R&D, in greater technology improvements, even in the education sector, for example, where we need more investments in STEM education, for example. So I think improving the spending priorities will be very important.
Okay. Well, you also refer to the external side. Well, it's very well known that Cyprus has an open and small economy. It's vulnerable to external shocks. My question is Cyprus well placed to face a possible, not a possible, a slowdown in the euro area and in the world economy in general, and potentially even a recession or a downturn in major economies or countries that are major trading partners of Cyprus?
Yes, indeed, the Cyprus export market is very much exposed to the European Union. The tourism sector in particular is also very exposed to the UK market. What we have seen so far is that the arrivals from UK has not really dropped. However, the spending, tourism spending has declined.
Yes.
So there are clearly risks from the potential hard Brexit, for example. And aside from tourism, there are risks to, say, foreign direct investment or demand for business services. At the same time, I think there are some developments which bode well for the Cypriot economy. For example, the Cyprus economy is much more service-oriented, based on service sector, and what we see globally is that this has been less affected, and it is, as a result, Cyprus is not as exposed to, say, a slowdown in the manufacturing sector in the European Union or the car industry in Germany, for example. I think this is one of the mitigating factors. But it will be important that the Cypriot economy, the exports, there is a more diversification of markets. We have seen that the authorities are taking some measures in this regard, but to improve, to invite more FDI, which also increases the business linkages. So this will be an important area to focus on.
Well, we have a major reform implemented and kicking in this year, this year, is the National Health Scheme. Does the IMF see any fiscal risks stemming from the NHS?
So yes, indeed, we have highlighted that this is a potential source of risk for the fiscal sector. I would say there are two sources of risk here. One stems from the
public hospitals, you mean?
Public hospitals, yes, indeed. For example, there's always a concern that the public hospitals will not be competitive vis-a-vis the private sector. And the services will be moved more towards the private sector, in which case there will be larger deficits, and this will have an impact on the budget. The second source of risk is the way the system is designed and the incentives that are built into the system. For example, there is the fact that there is universal coverage already increases the demand for services. The fact that there is population aging will also increase the demand on the health sector. But if the incentives are not right, there will also be a tendency to prescribe more services than may be necessary. So these are risks that we see in many health systems around the world. But what will be important is that there is a strong monitoring, very strict monitoring, to see how the cost of services are evolving, and that the regulatory framework is in place and adjustments are made to correct for these incentives going forward.
So essentially, the IMF would be suggesting that the state or the organization, health insurance organization, monitors more, let's say, closely the progress of the state health organization services, so it would recover more funds from while providing services?
The monitoring is not just about the state health services, but also in the entire health system, how the systems are designed in terms of co-payments or in terms of the reimbursements. So for both the providers, public and private, as well as for the consumers, the design of the system will be very important, and depending on how this is evolving, adjustments need to be made.
Okay, let's turn now to the banking sector. As you said, the NPL rate, which was the main vulnerability, dropped from 50% to 30%. Where does the banking sector stand?
So the banking system sector has improved a lot if you're comparing to, say, 2013. Yeah. What we see that in addition to the NPLs, the banking system is now more, in addition to the NPLs coming down, the banking system is now more consolidated. There are fewer branches that is helping to increase the costs and the operational efficiency. Within the banking system, this was a very large, overstretched balance sheet. The size of the loans have now come down from very high levels. The capital position of the banks are stronger. There is more liquidity in the system, and we see that the profits became positive for the first time in about 8 years. So overall, it has come quite far from the 2013 levels.
Well, do you think that after there have been some large movements in NPL reduction? First of all, Bank of Cyprus, the island's larger lender, has sold an NPL package, 2.4 billion, and then there was the resolution of the Cyprus Cooperative Bank, which was state-owned. So you had another big part of NPLs moved outside the banking sector to a residual entity. How do you see now? I am personally witnessing a bit of a slowdown in the pace of reduction of NPLs. Do you think that NPLs workout restructurings are going well, or have we lost pace in the current months?
So, as you said, indeed, the NPLs have really moved away from the banking system to these credit acquiring companies, which are basically buying the companies that have bought the loans. This is a relatively new development, and we have advised the central bank in the capacity as a supervisor to strengthen its regulatory and supervision framework. We have seen some progress in this respect, in terms of inspections or supervisions. I think it will be very important to develop a good monitoring framework to see how the pace at which they are resolving these bad debts. And in this context, I think again the foreclosure framework will be very important, so that there is the right incentives in place to resolve these debt. And on the issue of Kedipes, which is like now one of the largest asset management companies in Europe.
Relative to GDP, right?
Relative to GDP, but there is a substantial amount of NPLs there. It'll be important to expedite the operational framework for Kedipes, so that they have a good operational independence from the government, but also public transparency of these operations.
Well, now, okay, we talked about the consolidation. Do you think that we need further consolidation, the banking sector?
Indeed, so what we see in terms of indicators of operational efficiency is that even though a lot has been achieved, Cyprus is still lagging behind in terms of, let's say, indicators such as deposits as a percentage of branches, or the number of people being served per branch. It is less than half that of the euro area. Even other indicators like the size of the assets per employee in the banking system is less than half of the euro area. So there is room to improve the operational efficiency. What this means is that we'll probably expect to see more consolidation, and in return, consequently, perhaps fewer workers, for fewer employees in the banking system. And this process will be even more urgent as the banks take on a digital transformation going forward.
Because we have the so-called fintech banks competing with commercial banks without the regulatory burden imposed by the regulators, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they're under, you believe there will be, banks in general, commercial banks will be under more pressure due to technology.
Mm-hmm. So looking at the banking landscape even outside Cyprus, indeed there's more competition coming from fintechs to banking sector, and that has also, it is an opportunity, but also a threat in the sense that digitalization has become necessary. In Cyprus, we have not seen the impact of fintechs creating competitive pressures for banks yet, but from a forward-looking sense, I think it is important to be prepared, and even without the fintechs, I think there is a need to improve the digital transformation to strengthen its efficiency.
Well, thank you very much, and we hope to see you in the next review.
Thank you very much for having me.